The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla made her way through the grand corridors. She had always been particular about protocol, but today something felt different. The weight of recent public criticism had been pressing on her shoulders, and the constant scrutiny from both the media and palace staff was beginning to show its effects. Guard Thompson stood at his usual post near the Queen's private entrance, a position he had held for nearly 8 years. He was known among his colleagues for his unwavering dedication and attention to detail. Every morning he would arrive 30 minutes early to ensure everything was perfect for the royal family's daily routines. His polished boots reflected the morning light, and his uniform was immaculate as always. The Queen approached with her usual entourage of ladies-in-waiting and personal assistants. She had spent the previous evening reading harsh newspaper articles about her recent public appearances, with critics questioning her suitability for the role she had grown into over the years. The comments had stung more than usual, particularly those that compared her unfavorably to the late Queen Elizabeth, whose memory still cast a long shadow over the monarchy. As she reached the checkpoint where Thompson stood guard, something unexpected happened. The Queen's personal bag caught on the ornate door handle, causing several important documents to scatter across the marble floor. Among them were private letters from family members and confidential palace correspondence that should never have been seen by anyone outside her inner circle. Thompson, following his training and natural instincts, immediately stepped forward to assist. He began gathering the papers with the utmost care and discretion, ensuring that no one else could see their contents. His movements were swift and professional, exactly as he had been trained to handle such situations involving royal privacy. However, in his eagerness to help, Thompson accidentally stepped on the hem of the Queen's dress as he reached for a document that had blown further away. The delicate fabric caught under his boot, creating a small tear and causing the Queen to stumble slightly. The incident happened in full view of several palace staff members and a photographer who had been granted access to document routine palace activities. The Queen's face flushed, with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. The morning's events, combined with the ongoing pressure she had been feeling, reached a tipping point. Without thinking, her hand moved swiftly, making contact with Thompson's face in a moment of pure reaction. The sound echoed through the corridor, causing everyone present to freeze in shocked silence. Thompson stood perfectly still, his training preventing him from reacting despite the sting on his cheek. His eyes showed surprise but also understanding of the Queen's obvious distress. He had served the royal family long enough to recognize when someone was struggling under immense pressure, and he could see that this was not truly about him or his mistake. The witnesses to this unprecedented event included Sarah Mills, the Queen's personal secretary, who had been walking 3 steps behind and saw everything unfold. There was also James Crawford, a veteran palace photographer who had his camera ready but chose not to capture the moment, understanding instinctively that some things should remain private despite their potential value. Lady Patricia Worthington, one of the Queen's closest confidants and ladies-in-waiting, stepped forward immediately. She had known Camilla for over 2 decades and recognized the signs of someone who had reached their breaking point. Her presence provided a calming influence as she gently placed her hand on the Queen's arm, offering silent support. The aftermath of the incident created an immediate tension throughout the corridor. Staff members exchanged glances, unsure of how to proceed or what protocol existed for such a situation. The usual buzz of palace activity seemed to pause, as if the very building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Thompson maintained his professional composure despite the personal nature of what had just occurred. He understood that his reaction in this moment would set the tone for how the incident would be remembered and potentially reported. His years of service had taught him that protecting the royal family sometimes meant protecting them from themselves and their human moments. The Queen immediately realized what she had done, and the color drained from her face. The weight of her action settled on her shoulders even more heavily than the morning's earlier frustrations. She looked at Thompson, seeing not just a guard who had made a simple mistake, but a dedicated servant who had been nothing but loyal to her family for nearly a decade. Crawford, the photographer, made a conscious decision to delete the few frames he had captured automatically when his camera's rapid-fire mode had activated. He understood that while the moment might have news value, preserving it would serve no positive purpose for anyone involved. His choice reflected the complex relationship between the media and the monarchy, where professional duty sometimes conflicts with human decency. The scattered documents remained on the floor, temporarily forgotten in the wake of the incident. These papers, which had started the entire sequence of events, now seemed insignificant compared to the human drama that had unfolded. Lady Patricia quietly signaled to another staff member to collect them while everyone's attention was focused on the immediate situation. Word of the incident began to spread quickly through the palace's informal communication networks, as such things inevitably do in close-knit communities. However, the initial reports were fragmented and varied wildly in their details, with some staff members uncertain about what they had actually witnessed versus what they thought they had seen. The Queen's emotional state became the primary concern for those closest to her. They recognized that this outburst was completely out of character and indicated deeper issues that needed to be addressed. The pressure of public life, combined with the constant comparisons to her predecessor, had clearly taken a more significant toll than anyone had realized. As the immediate shock of the moment began to fade, everyone present faced a critical decision about how to handle what they had witnessed. The loyalty that palace staff felt toward the royal family was being tested against their personal feelings about what constituted appropriate behavior. Regardless of someone's position or stress level, the morning that had started as routine had transformed into something that would require careful navigation by everyone involved. The next few hours would prove crucial in determining whether this incident would remain a private matter handled internally or become something much more public and potentially damaging to the monarchy's carefully maintained reputation. King Charles was in his private study reviewing correspondence when his personal secretary, Michael Henderson, knocked urgently on the door. The king had been dealing with a particularly complex matter regarding Commonwealth relations and was deeply focused on the documents spread across his mahogany desk. The morning had been proceeding according to his carefully planned schedule, with each appointment and briefing flowing seamlessly into the next. Henderson's expression was grave as he entered the room. In his 15 years of service to the royal family, he had delivered many types of news, but this situation was unlike anything he had encountered before. He approached the king's desk with measured steps, understanding that the information he was about to share would require delicate handling and immediate attention. The message Henderson carried had reached him through carefully established channels within the palace. Lady Patricia had discreetly contacted him after consulting with Sarah Mills and other senior staff members. They had collectively decided that the king needed to be informed immediately, both for the sake of the Queen's well-being and to ensure that any necessary damage control could begin without delay. King Charles looked up from his papers as Henderson cleared his throat softly. The king's expression shifted from mild curiosity to concern as he noticed the unusual tension in his secretary's posture. Over the years, Charles had developed an ability to read people's moods quickly, a skill that had served him well throughout his decades of public service and personal relationships. Henderson chose his words carefully, explaining the morning's incident with as much objectivity as possible, while also conveying the emotional context that had led to the Queen's unexpected reaction. He emphasized Thompson's professionalism throughout the situation and the immediate concern that senior staff members felt for the Queen's obvious distress and well-being. The king's initial response was a moment of stunned silence. He set down the pen he had been holding and leaned back in his leather chair, processing the implications of what he had just heard. His mind immediately went to Camilla's emotional state and the mounting pressures she had been facing, particularly the recent surge in negative media coverage that had been affecting her more deeply than she typically admitted. Without hesitation, King Charles rose from his desk and instructed Henderson to clear his schedule for the next 2 hours. He understood that this situation required his immediate personal attention, not just as the sovereign but as Camilla's husband and partner. The Commonwealth correspondence that had seemed so important moments earlier was quickly set aside as more pressing family matters took priority. As the king made his way through the palace corridors toward the location where the incident had occurred, he reflected on the recent months and the signs he might have missed regarding his wife's emotional state. He recalled conversations where she had seemed more withdrawn than usual, and moments when her public smile had appeared, more forced than genuine. The walk through the palace gave Charles time to consider the multiple aspects of the situation he was about to address. There was the immediate need to check on Thompson's welfare and ensure that a loyal staff member felt supported rather than abandoned. There was also the crucial matter of Camilla's emotional well-being and the underlying issues that had contributed to this completely uncharacteristic outburst. Palace staff members who encountered the king during his journey noticed his purposeful stride and serious expression. Word had begun to circulate about some kind of incident involving the queen, though the details remained unclear to most employees. The king's visible concern only served to heighten the sense that something significant had occurred. When Charles arrived at the location, he found that the immediate area had been discreetly cleared of unnecessary personnel. Thompson remained at his post, though his usual confident bearing showed subtle signs of the morning's events. The guard's dedication to duty was evident in his continued presence and professional demeanor, despite what had transpired. The king's first action was to approach Thompson directly, speaking to him with the warmth and respect that characterized his interactions with palace staff. He inquired about the guard's well-being and made it clear that he understood the circumstances that had led to the incident. This personal attention from the sovereign meant a great deal to Thompson, who had been uncertain about his position following the morning's events. Charles then asked to speak with his wife privately, and arrangements were quickly made for them to use a nearby private sitting room. The conversation that followed was one of the most important they had shared in recent months, addressing not just the immediate incident, but the broader pressures and challenges that had been building in their lives. During their private discussion, the Queen expressed her mortification about her behavior and her deep regret over treating a loyal staff member in such a manner. She explained how the accumulation of negative press coverage, constant public scrutiny, and the perpetual comparisons to the late Queen Elizabeth had created an emotional burden she had been struggling to manage. Privately, King Charles listened with the patience and understanding that had developed through their many years together. He recognized that his wife's reaction, while inappropriate, had been the result of genuine emotional distress rather than any character flaw or lack of respect for their dedicated staff. He also understood that this incident was a symptom of larger issues that needed to be addressed systematically. The king's response combined immediate, practical action with longer-term planning for supporting his wife's emotional well-being. He arranged for additional private time in their schedules, suggested reducing certain public commitments that had been causing particular stress, and proposed bringing in discreet professional support to help manage the ongoing pressures of their public roles. Meanwhile, Lady Patricia had been coordinating with senior palace officials to ensure that everyone who had witnessed the incident understood the importance of discretion and confidentiality. The palace's crisis management protocols were being quietly activated, not because of any external threat, but to protect the Queen's privacy and dignity during a vulnerable moment. The photographer, Crawford, was personally thanked by the king for his decision to delete the images and his demonstration of loyalty to the royal family's well-being over potential professional gain. This gesture of appreciation reinforced the culture of mutual respect and discretion that was essential to the functioning of the palace community. By midday, a sense of resolution was beginning to emerge from the morning's chaos. The king's swift and compassionate response had addressed the immediate concerns, while also laying the groundwork for preventing similar incidents in the future. His leadership in this crisis demonstrated the importance of treating family members and staff with equal dignity and understanding when human emotions override professional protocols. The afternoon brought an unexpected development that would test everyone's commitment to discretion. Rebecca Martinez, a freelance journalist who specialized in royal coverage, had been cultivating sources within the palace staff for several months. She had built relationships based on small favors and the promise of anonymity, creating a network of information that had served her well in previous stories. One of Martinez's contacts, a junior staff member named David Walsh, had overheard fragments of conversation about the morning's incident. Walsh worked in the palace maintenance department and had been performing routine repairs near the corridor where everything had unfolded. His position often made him invisible to senior staff, allowing him to observe and hear things that might otherwise remain completely private. Walsh contacted Martinez through their usual encrypted messaging system, hinting that he had information about a significant incident involving Queen Camilla and a palace guard. He was careful not to provide too many details initially, knowing that Martinez would be willing to pay for exclusive information that could generate substantial media attention. Martinez immediately recognized the potential value of this tip. Royal scandals, particularly those involving alleged inappropriate behavior, were guaranteed to capture public attention and drive significant web traffic and newspaper sales. She began pressing Walsh for more specific details while simultaneously reaching out to other sources who might be able to confirm or expand upon the story. The journalist's investigation led her to contact several palace employees through various channels. She approached maintenance workers, kitchen staff, and even attempted to reach guards who might have heard about the incident through their professional networks. Her persistence and experience in extracting information from reluctant sources began to yield fragments of the story. However, Martinez quickly discovered that the palace staff's loyalty was stronger than she had anticipated. Most of the employees she contacted either claimed to know nothing about any incident or politely declined to discuss palace matters. The culture of discretion that had been cultivated over many years was proving to be an effective barrier against her investigation. Despite these initial roadblocks, Martinez was not easily deterred. She began researching public records of palace staff assignments and cross-referencing them with social media profiles and public databases. Her goal was to identify individuals who might be more susceptible to pressure or financial incentives to share information about the morning's events. Meanwhile, within the palace, Security Chief Colonel James Heartfelt had been made aware of the external interest in the morning's incident. His responsibility for protecting the royal family extended beyond physical security to include information security and reputation management. He immediately initiated protocols designed to identify and address potential information leaks. Heartfelt's investigation revealed that Walsh had been asking unusual questions and showing interest in areas of the palace that were outside his normal work responsibilities. Security cameras had captured him lingering near locations where he had no legitimate reason to be, and his recent communications patterns showed contact with known media figures. The security chief faced a delicate situation. He needed to address the potential security breach without creating a larger incident that might draw even more attention to the original problem. His approach would need to be firm enough to prevent further leaks while avoiding actions that could be seen as heavy-handed or that might prompt Walsh to immediately sell whatever information he had already gathered. King Charles was briefed on these developments during his evening briefing with senior palace officials. The revelation that outside parties were already seeking information about the morning's incident added a new layer of complexity to an already sensitive situation. The king understood that the palace's response to this external pressure would be crucial in determining whether the story remained contained or exploded into a major public controversy. The royal couple spent their evening discussing not just the original incident but also the broader implications of living under constant scrutiny. Queen Camilla expressed her frustration with the impossibility of having truly private moments when even a single emotional outburst could potentially become international news. The weight of always having to maintain perfect composure was something she had never fully adjusted to, despite years in the public eye. Their conversation revealed the deep personal cost of their public roles. Both acknowledged that the pressure to be perpetually perfect in the eyes of the public and media had created an environment where natural human emotions and reactions were seen as scandalous rather than understandable. This realization prompted them to consider whether changes needed to be made in how they approached their public duties. King Charles contacted his private secretary to arrange discreet meetings with senior palace staff who had been present during the morning's incident. His goal was to personally thank them for their professionalism and discretion, while also ensuring they felt supported and valued. He understood that their continued loyalty would be essential in preventing the story from spreading further. These individual meetings allowed the king to gauge each person's emotional response to what they had witnessed and to address any concerns they might have about the queen's behavior or their own future security within their positions. His personal attention and genuine concern for their well-being reinforced the family atmosphere that he and Queen Camilla tried to maintain among their closest staff members. Thompson, the guard who had been at the center of the incident, was given special attention during his meeting with the king. Charles took time to understand the young man's background, his family situation, and his career aspirations within the Royal Protection Service. This personal interest demonstrated that Thompson's value to the royal family extended far beyond his role as a witness to an uncomfortable moment. The king also used these meetings to subtly gather information about any unusual behavior or questions from other staff members. Without directly accusing anyone, he was able to identify that Walsh had indeed been asking questions and showing interest in areas that raised red flags among the more experienced palace employees. By the end of the day, a clearer picture was emerging of both the internal dynamics and external pressures surrounding the incident. The palace's traditional methods of maintaining privacy were being tested by modern information networks and financial incentives that made confidential information increasingly valuable to outside parties. The evening concluded with King Charles and Queen Camilla making a mutual commitment to address the underlying stress factors that had contributed to the morning's outburst. They also agreed on the importance of maintaining their staff's loyalty through continued personal attention and support, understanding that their people's discretion was their most valuable protection against public embarrassment. The challenge they faced was balancing their genuine care for their staff's well-being with the practical necessity of ensuring information security. This balance would become even more critical as external pressure to reveal details about the incident continued to mount from sources that had no personal loyalty to the royal family or understanding of the human elements involved in the morning's events. The next morning brought an escalation that no one had anticipated. Rebecca Martinez had worked through the night, piecing together fragments of information from multiple sources and creating a narrative that was compelling enough to capture editorial attention. Her story, while lacking specific details about what had actually happened, painted a picture of tension and inappropriate behavior within the palace walls. Martinez had reached out to several tabloid newspapers and online publications, offering her story to the highest bidder. The competitive nature of royal coverage meant that multiple outlets were interested in acquiring exclusive rights to publish what they believed could be a significant scandal. The bidding war that ensued drove up both the price and the pressure to publish quickly, before competitors could break the story. However, Martinez faced a significant challenge in her reporting. Despite her efforts to gather concrete evidence, she still lacked crucial details about the actual incident. Her sources had provided only vague descriptions and second-hand accounts, leaving her with a story that was tantalizing but potentially difficult to substantiate if challenged by palace representatives or legal teams. The journalist's decision to proceed with publication despite these gaps would prove to be both bold and risky. She crafted her article using careful language that implied more than it directly stated, relying on readers to fill in the gaps with their own assumptions about what might have occurred behind palace walls. This approach allowed her to create impact while potentially protecting herself from libel claims. Palace officials became aware of the impending publication through their media monitoring systems, which tracked mentions of royal family members across various platforms and publications. The alert reached Colonel Hartwell's desk just hours before Martinez's story was scheduled to appear online, giving the palace very little time to prepare an appropriate response strategy. The security chief immediately convened an emergency meeting with the king's communications team and senior palace officials. The group faced the challenging task of deciding how to respond to a story that they knew was based on incomplete and potentially inaccurate information, while also avoiding any actions that might inadvertently confirm or expand upon the details being reported. King Charles was briefed on the situation during his morning coffee, turning what should have been a peaceful start to his day into another crisis management session. The king's initial reaction was frustration, not just with the media attention, but with the realization that his family's private moments would always be vulnerable to public scrutiny and misrepresentation. Queen Camilla's response to the news was a mixture of anger and resignation. She had hoped that the previous day's discreet handling of the situation would be sufficient to prevent any public exposure. But she also understood from years of experience that royal life offered little protection from determined journalists and their sources. The Palace Communications team, led by Director Emma Thompson, began developing multiple response strategies depending on how much detail the published story would contain. Their options ranged from complete silence, which was often the most effective approach, to a limited statement that would acknowledge the incident without providing additional details that could fuel further speculation. Meanwhile, David Walsh was experiencing his own crisis of conscience. The maintenance worker had initially been motivated by the financial reward that Martinez had promised, but as publication became imminent, he began to worry about the potential consequences of his actions. His years of employment at the palace had provided him with stability and pride in his work, both of which were now at risk. Walsh's internal conflict intensified when he realized that his information might be used to damage people he actually respected and had worked alongside for several years. Queen Camilla had always been polite and considerate during their brief interactions, and he knew that Guard Thompson was regarded as one of the most professional and dedicated members of the security team. The maintenance worker made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He contacted Colonel Heartfelt directly, requesting an immediate meeting where he could explain his role in the information leak and attempt to minimize the damage his actions might cause. This unexpected development provided the palace with crucial intelligence about what information had been shared and how it might be presented. Heartfelt's meeting with Walsh revealed both the extent of the security breach and the limitations of the information that had been provided to Martinez. The maintenance worker's account confirmed that, while he had overheard discussions about an incident, he had not actually witnessed the events himself and could only provide secondhand information that was necessarily incomplete and potentially inaccurate. This intelligence allowed the Palace Communications team to prepare more targeted responses to the likely content of Martinez's article. They could anticipate which aspects of the story might be accurate and which elements were probably based on speculation or misunderstanding, enabling them to craft responses that were truthful without being unnecessarily damaging. The king decided to personally speak with Thompson again, this time to prepare the guard for the possibility that his name and involvement might become public knowledge. Charles understood that Thompson's professional reputation and future career prospects could be affected by the media coverage, regardless of his complete innocence in the situation. Thompson's reaction to this news demonstrated the professionalism and loyalty that had made him valued among palace staff. Rather than expressing concern for his own situation, he immediately offered to take any action that might help protect the Queen from further embarrassment or criticism. His primary worry was that the incident would be used to attack the royal family rather than being understood as an isolated moment of human stress. The guard's attitude provided both inspiration and guidance for how others should approach the impending media storm. His focus on protecting the institution and the people he served, rather than on his own interests, exemplified the dedication that made the palace community function effectively, despite constant external pressures. As the morning progressed, palace officials made the difficult decision to proactively reach out to several major news organizations that had not been involved in Martinez's investigation. Their goal was to provide context and background, information that might encourage more responsible reporting if the story gained wider attention. Beyond its initial publication, these discreet conversations with established royal correspondents allowed palace officials to emphasize the human elements of the situation without directly confirming or denying specific details. They could highlight the pressures that royal family members faced and the dedication of palace staff, creating a framework for understanding that might influence how other media outlets approach the story. The strategy of engaging with trusted journalists also served to create alternative narratives that might compete with Martinez's version of events. By providing context and background to reporters who had established relationships with the palace, officials could encourage coverage that was more nuanced and less sensationalized than what might emerge from purely competitive reporting. Queen Camilla spent the morning in meetings with her personal staff, discussing how to handle any public appearances or engagements that might be affected by the media attention. Her schedule included several events where she would likely face questions from reporters, and she needed to prepare responses that were dignified and appropriate regardless of what specific allegations might be published. The afternoon would bring the actual publication of Martinez's story and the beginning of a new phase in this evolving crisis. The palace's preparations had been as thorough as time allowed, but the unpredictable nature of media response and public reaction meant that the real test of their crisis management capabilities was about to begin. The story broke at 2:47 p.m. on a busy Tuesday afternoon, appearing first on the website of a mid-tier tabloid publication before being picked up by larger news aggregators within minutes. Martinez's article carried the sensational headline, "Palace. Insider reveals shocking Queen Camilla incident," and promised exclusive details about unprecedented behavior behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace. The actual content of the article was less explosive than its headline suggested, but it contained enough specific details to capture immediate attention from both media competitors and social media users. Martinez had skillfully woven together her fragments of information to create a narrative that implied serious misconduct, without making specific accusations that could easily be challenged or disproven. Within an hour of publication, the story had been shared thousands of times across various social media platforms, with users adding their own interpretations and commentary to the basic facts presented in the original article. The viral nature of the content demonstrated how quickly royal news could spread beyond traditional media channels into broader public conversation. Palace officials had been monitoring the situation closely and were able to track the story's spread in real time through their media analysis systems. The speed at which the narrative was evolving across different platforms made it clear that a coordinated response would be necessary to prevent the story from growing beyond what the actual facts could support. Director Emma Thompson convened her communications team for an emergency strategy session as soon as the article went live. Their challenge was to craft a response that would address public curiosity without providing additional details that could fuel further speculation or investigation by other journalists who were already beginning to follow up on Martinez's initial reporting. The team's analysis of the published story revealed that, while it contained some accurate information about an incident occurring, many of the details were either speculative or based on incomplete understanding of what had actually happened. This gap between the published narrative and reality provided opportunities for response, but it also created risks if the palace's corrections inadvertently confirmed other aspects of the story. King Charles was informed of the publication during a scheduled briefing about Commonwealth affairs, immediately shifting his attention from international relations to family crisis management. His first concern was for his wife's emotional well-being, knowing that she would be deeply affected by seeing their private moment transformed into public entertainment and speculation. The king's private secretary arranged for Queen Camilla to be informed about the publication in a controlled setting, where she could process the information with appropriate support available. Lady Patricia was present during this conversation, providing the emotional support that had proven invaluable during the original incident and its immediate aftermath. Queen Camilla's reaction to seeing her private moment of stress transformed into a public scandal was a complex mixture of anger, embarrassment, and resolve. She understood that this type of media attention was an inevitable part of her role, but she had hoped that the professionalism and loyalty of palace staff would provide some protection for moments when her human emotions overwhelmed her royal training. The Queen's primary concern, like her husband's, was for the impact this story might have on Guard Thompson and other staff members who had been present during the original incident. She worried that their careers and reputations might suffer as a result of what she viewed as her own failure to maintain appropriate composure under stress. Thompson himself learned about the publication through the palace's internal communication system, which ensured that staff members heard about potentially relevant news through official channels rather than through outside media or social networks. His reaction demonstrated the same professionalism he had shown during the original incident, focusing on his duty rather than on personal concerns. The Guard's colleagues in the palace security team rallied around him with supportive messages and practical assistance in dealing with the attention he might receive. Their response reflected the strong bonds that existed among palace staff and their understanding that external criticism of any team member was ultimately criticism of their collective professionalism and dedication. Meanwhile, David Walsh was experiencing severe anxiety about his role in creating the media storm. The maintenance worker had hoped that his last-minute confession to Colonel Hartwell might somehow prevent or minimize the publication, but he now realized that the information he had provided was already beyond his control and was being used in ways he had never intended. Walsh's confession had indeed provided valuable intelligence to palace officials, but it could not undo the fact that sensitive information had been shared with external parties who had no loyalty to the royal family or understanding of the context surrounding the incident. His cooperation with palace security would be noted in his favor, but the damage to trust and confidentiality was already done. The afternoon brought a series of follow-up inquiries from major news organizations that wanted to develop their own versions of the story. Royal correspondents from established newspapers and television networks began reaching out to their own sources within and around the palace, seeking confirmation or additional details that could support expanded coverage. Palace officials found themselves managing multiple concurrent conversations with different media outlets, each seeking to balance their professional relationships with journalists against their responsibility to protect the royal family's privacy and dignity. These discussions required careful navigation to provide sufficient cooperation to maintain long-term media relationships without compromising the family's interests. The story's impact extended beyond immediate media coverage into social media discussions that took on lives of their own. Twitter users, Facebook commenters, and Instagram influencers began creating their own interpretations of the events, often adding dramatic elements that had no basis in the original reporting, but that made for more engaging content. This social media amplification created additional challenges for palace communications staff, who found themselves needing to monitor and potentially respond to dozens of different narrative threads that were evolving simultaneously across multiple platforms. The decentralized nature of social media meant that correcting misinformation required constant vigilance and multiple response strategies. Queen Camilla made a personal decision that surprised her advisors by requesting to make a brief public appearance later in the day at a previously scheduled engagement with a children's charity. Her staff had assumed she would want to avoid public exposure until the media attention subsided, but she felt that retreating from her responsibilities would only fuel further speculation about her state of mind. Her decision to proceed with the charity visit demonstrated both personal courage and strategic thinking about how to manage the crisis. By appearing in public conducting normal royal duties with her usual grace and composure, she could provide visual evidence that contradicted any suggestions of instability or inappropriate behavior that might emerge from the media coverage. The charity event provided an opportunity for the Queen to demonstrate her commitment to her royal duties while also showing the public that she remained focused on the causes and communities she served. Her interaction with the children and charity staff at the event would create positive imagery that could compete with the negative implications of the morning's media coverage. However, the public appearance also meant facing questions from reporters who were covering the charity event, but were inevitably more interested in the palace incident than in the charitable work being showcased. Queen Camilla's ability to handle these inquiries with dignity while maintaining focus on the charity's mission would prove crucial to how the overall story developed in subsequent days. The evening concluded with palace officials conducting a comprehensive review of the day's media coverage and social media response, preparing strategies for managing continued attention, while also identifying lessons learned that could help prevent similar situations in the future. The incident had revealed vulnerabilities in palace information security that needed to be addressed systematically. The charity event proved to be a turning point in how the public and media perceived the entire situation. Queen Camilla's appearance at the Children's Hospital was marked by genuine warmth and engagement that seemed to contradict any implications of erratic behavior suggested by the morning's news coverage. Her interactions with young patients and their families showcased the compassionate side of her personality that had won over many skeptics during her years in royal service. Television cameras captured moments that told a different story than the one dominating headlines. Children who had been receiving treatment for serious illnesses lit up when the Queen entered their rooms, and she spent considerably more time than scheduled listening to their stories and offering encouragement. These images created a powerful counter-narrative to suggestions that she might be unsuitable for her royal role. The Queen's conversation with 8-year-old Lucy Henderson, who was recovering from surgery, became particularly meaningful when the child asked her directly about being sad sometimes. Queen Camilla's honest response about how everyone faces difficult days, even people in important positions, resonated with many viewers who saw the exchange on evening news broadcasts. Her answer to Lucy demonstrated both authenticity and wisdom, explaining that feeling overwhelmed or emotional was part of being human, and that the important thing was learning from those moments and treating others with kindness, even when we're struggling ourselves. This simple explanation to a child provided more context for the morning's incident than any official palace statement could have achieved. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Colonel Hartwell's investigation had revealed the full scope of how information had leaked from the palace. His detailed analysis showed that while Walsh had been the primary source, there had been other minor security gaps that could potentially be exploited by determined journalists or other outside parties seeking confidential information. 3 months after the incident, the palace had settled into new rhythms that reflected the lessons learned from those challenging days. The enhanced security protocols implemented by Colonel Hartwell had become seamlessly integrated into daily operations, providing better protection for sensitive information without creating an atmosphere of suspicion or fear among the staff members, who made the royal household function. Effectively, Queen Camilla had used the experience as an opportunity for personal growth and public engagement in ways that surprised even her closest advisors. She had begun speaking more openly about the challenges of public life and the importance of mental health support, turning her moment of vulnerability into a platform for helping others who faced similar pressures in their own lives and careers. Her work with stress management and emotional well-being had resonated particularly strongly with working mothers and women in leadership positions who faced similar challenges of maintaining professional composure while dealing with personal pressures. The Queen's willingness to acknowledge her own humanity had made her more relatable and effective in her charitable work focused on mental health awareness. The transformation in public perception had been remarkable. What had initially appeared to be a damaging scandal had evolved into an opportunity for deeper connection between the royal family and the people they served. The incident had demonstrated that even those in the highest positions faced ordinary human challenges, making the monarchy seem more accessible and authentic to many observers. Guard Thompson had emerged from the experience with enhanced respect from his colleagues and superiors. His professional handling of the original incident and his discretion during the media attention that followed had marked him as someone with exceptional character and judgment. His career prospects within the Royal Protection Service had actually improved as a result of how he had navigated the challenging situation. Thompson's experience had also led to improvements in training programs for palace staff, incorporating scenarios that helped employees understand how to handle unexpected situations involving the royal family's private moments. These training sessions emphasized the importance of maintaining dignity and discretion while also recognizing the human elements that made their roles both challenging and meaningful. The Guard had received personal thanks from both the King and Queen, but more importantly, he had gained confidence in his own judgment and professional capabilities. The incident had tested his character under pressure and revealed strengths that he hadn't fully recognized in himself, preparing him for greater responsibilities in his future service to the royal family. David Walsh's journey had taken a different but equally important direction. Rather than being dismissed from his position, he had been offered additional training and responsibilities that demonstrated the palace's commitment to redemption and second chances. His cooperation during the investigation and his genuine remorse for his actions had earned him a path back to trusted status within the palace community. Walsh's case had become an example of how the royal household could respond to mistakes with understanding and education, rather than simply punishment. His experience was now used in staff orientation programs to help new employees understand the importance of confidentiality and the consequences of sharing sensitive information, while also demonstrating that honest mistakes could be forgiven when handled appropriately. The maintenance worker had also become involved in palace security awareness programs, sharing his perspective on how external pressures could influence staff decisions and helping to identify potential vulnerabilities before they became actual problems. His unique experience made him valuable in helping prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. Rebecca Martinez faced different consequences for her role in the incident. While her initial article had generated significant attention, the long-term impact on her career had been more complex than she had anticipated. Some editors and fellow journalists had praised her enterprise in breaking the story, while others questioned her methods and the ultimate value of the coverage. The journalist's experience had become a case study in media ethics courses, examining the balance between public interest and privacy rights, particularly when covering public figures who were experiencing personal stress or emotional challenges. Her story illustrated the potential consequences of publishing reports based on limited sources and incomplete information. Martinez had eventually moved on to other assignments, but the royal story had taught her important lessons about the responsibilities that came with covering powerful and influential figures. She had developed a more nuanced understanding of when stories truly served the public interest versus when they simply satisfied public curiosity at the expense of individual dignity. King Charles had used the entire experience to strengthen his approach to leadership within the royal family and the broader institution of the monarchy. The crisis had revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths in how the palace operated, providing valuable insights that informed his ongoing efforts to modernize and improve royal operations while maintaining essential traditions. The king's handling of the situation had demonstrated his commitment to supporting both his family members and palace staff during difficult times. His personal involvement in addressing the concerns of everyone affected by the incident had reinforced the culture of mutual respect and loyalty that was essential to the palace's effective functioning. His leadership during the crisis had also enhanced his standing with senior palace officials and government representatives who had observed how he balanced personal loyalty with institutional responsibilities. The experience had provided evidence of his judgment and character that would serve him well in future challenges that inevitably come with royal leadership. The long-term changes implemented as a result of the incident extended beyond security protocols to include enhanced support systems for both royal family members and palace staff. Regular counseling services had been made available, stress management workshops were conducted periodically, and communication channels had been improved to ensure that concerns could be addressed before they escalated into crisis situations. These improvements had created a healthier working environment that benefited everyone involved in royal operations. Staff members reported feeling more supported and valued, while royal family members had better resources for managing the unique pressures of their public roles. The palace had become not just more secure, but more humane in its approach to the people who made its mission possible. The incident had also led to broader conversations within the royal household about work-life balance and the importance of maintaining perspective during stressful periods. Regular team meetings now included discussions about emotional well-being alongside operational concerns, creating a more holistic approach to palace management that recognized the human elements of institutional service. As Queen Camilla reflected on the experience months later, she realized that what had initially seemed like a personal failure had ultimately become an opportunity for growth and positive change. The incident had taught her valuable lessons about managing stress, seeking support when needed, and the importance of treating everyone with respect even during difficult moments. Her relationship with the palace staff had actually strengthened as a result of how the situation had been handled. The transparency and accountability she had shown in addressing her behavior had earned respect from employees who appreciated her willingness to acknowledge mistakes and work toward improvement. This authenticity had enhanced rather than damaged her authority within the royal household. The Queen's public work had also been enriched by her personal experience with stress and emotional challenges. Her advocacy for mental health awareness had gained credibility and impact because it was clearly based on genuine understanding rather than simply ceremonial support for important causes. The incident that had begun as a moment of human weakness had ultimately demonstrated the strength and resilience of both the individuals involved and the institution they served. The royal family had shown that they could handle crisis with grace and wisdom, learning from mistakes rather than simply trying to hide them from public view. The palace had proven that it could adapt and improve while maintaining the essential characteristics that made the monarchy a valued institution. The balance between tradition and progress had been maintained even during a challenging period, providing confidence for handling future situations that would inevitably test the royal family's character and judgment. Most importantly, the experience had reinforced the value of treating everyone involved with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or role in events. This fundamental principle had guided every decision made during the crisis and had ultimately contributed to the positive outcomes that emerged from what could have been a purely destructive situation.